it's no secret that lots of folks get published, but a lot of people are out by by the time of their second or third book, and then so having uh, a long career is kind of an anomaly. And there's survivorship bias. You think of the writers that you really like, they're the ones that tend to have stuck around for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years or whatever. But the majority of folks kind of dip their toe in, and then for whatever reason, don't stay in. And so I get asked a lot. They're like, what's the secret? And one of the first things that I tell people, which aggravates them to no end, but is absolutely 100% true, is luck. You Luck is a huge part of it. I remember when Old Man's War came out. It came out on January 1st, 2005, which is an absolutely unfathomable day to have a book out. I mean, just think about, like, your very first book ever going to come out. Oh, I know. Let's put it out on a day where bookstores aren't open, and everybody has spent all their holiday money, uh, and they're all hungover. Nobody's going to go to the bookstore to pick up your book, and yet it went off.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 145 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me this week is my co-host, my bestie from the Midwestie, the queen of my days, my dear Greta Kelly. How you doing, Greta?
Hello, I'm good. Very excited for our interview tonight. It's going to be pretty awesome, I think.
Pretty awesome. Yeah, well, also what's awesome are Greta's books. If you want to go check out, she's got her duology, or her latest book, The Queen of Days, which is a bunch of misfit thieves causing a bunch of trouble for demons and gods. So
Yeah,
hopefully
it's
that's up
good
your
time.
alley.
And if you need more murder, mystery, and mayhem in your life, go check out the award-winning Mushroom Blues. It's got all that, noir, sci-fi awesomeness that everyone really needs.
You miss mushrooms.
Oh, and mushrooms, obviously.
Lots of mushrooms. And if you want to support MJ and her journey of quitting her day job, you can go pick up Among Thieves, her debut novel, and the sequel, Thick Ass Thieves, if you want to enjoy more heists. If the Queen of Days wasn't enough for you, you got more misfits right in the
Go for the trifecta. Trust me.
I got my thieves coming one day. As well, a quick note for listeners, you can support SFF Addicts on Patreon for a ton of cool extras like bonus episodes, author readings, and more. So check the links in the description to help us do what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now welcoming to SFF Addicts for the first time, the wonderful John Scalzi, author of a ton of fantastic books over the last 20 years, which blew my mind, including Old Man's War, Red Shirts, The Collapsing Empire, and more. Welcome to the show, John. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Very, very glad to have you here. And his newest book, which will be out very soon, March 25th, When the Moon Hits Your Eye. Very great title. Cheese,
So good.
moon cheese. It's all about moon cheese.
Moon cheese. When in doubt, the moon and cheese. Two great tastes that go great together, thematically at least.
Yes, thematic goodness. Maybe not so much on the edible side of things, but
you know what? We'll get into that.
Yeah, don't. But just as a general, don't be eating basalt. It's not good for you.
There's maybe some good minerals in there that the human body.
You're not my real dad.
On the whole,
I'll do what I want.
Well, John, for anyone who isn't aware of you and your work, if you can tell them a bit about yourself.
Let's see. So I've been writing science fiction for literally 20 years. 2005 was the year that Old Man's War, my first published novel, came out. And since then, I've been averaging about a novel a year, plus novellas, plus everything else. In 2012, I won the Hugo for Red Shirts. I've been nominated for the Hugo a whole bunch of times for books and then for other things as well. New York Times bestseller. I've been on short stories of mine have been adapted for the television series Love, Death, and Robots. I was president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association from 2010 to 2013. So I was literally the man in science fiction for 3 straight years. And then ever since then, I've basically just been sort of hanging out doing the science fiction writer thing. I have a blog that's been there since 1998, which means that I'm fantastically old. It has literally been around, I think, for half of my life. So there you have it. That's me.
John's got his fingers in
Yep.
everything, literally fucking everything. But
It's a hell of a resume.
I'm also a DJ, so there's that.
yeah, that's true. You did DJ that party back in Glasgow in August.
Yes,
at
indeed.
Worldcon. So a man of many talents.
Nice.
Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Welcome to Transference, where death and sickness are but a distant memory. Nicholas Five Boroughs is a sicko, someone that takes on others' illnesses. In a city where diseases can be transferred, the rich buy longer lives without pain, and the poor get a short life of constant sickness. Brought back from the brink of death by his friend Brian Meadowhearth, or maybe the invisible hand of an outside actor, Nick finally gets the chance to try and change things, to finally stop the whole disease transfer network. Tensions escalate as Nick infiltrates a higher society he doesn't understand, and starts to fall for Dorothy Sungate, the very person he needs to manipulate to be successful. And between run-ins with a talking cat, genetically modified humans, and a robotic police force, the world around him just keeps getting stranger. Can Nicholas tear down the disease transfer architecture? And how much of his humanity is he willing to bargain along the way? A dystopian vision of healthcare and a market economy, Transference will appeal to fans of Red Rising, Blade Runner, and the BioShock franchise. Soon to be a complete duology with the release of Transcendence in the summer of 2025. Transference by Ian Patterson is available now in paperback and ebook. Get your copy today. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts.
Well, we always love to delve into the nerdy origins to find out where all of those many talents came from. So tell us, are there any books or TV shows or movies that really sparked your interest in genre fiction when you were growing up?
So probably the book that I recognize as the very first science fiction book that I ever read, which is not to say it was, but it's the one that I remember, was Farmer in the Sky, and that's by Robert Heinlein. And it was one of his series of juvenile books. What they used to call juvies are now young adult. And I read that, I believe, in the fourth grade. And so I would say that that one was the one that started the ball rolling. But then there was also Wrinkle in Time by Madeline Engel. And then also the Dark is Rising series, which blew my mind when I was in fifth grade. I was like reading this. I was like, these are the greatest novels ever. Oh my God. And so that was Susan Cooper. And then another important book when I was very young was Dog's Body by Diana Wynne Jones, which was a really interesting story about Sirius the Star being punished for a murder he didn't commit, and is punished by being sent into an actual dog's body on Earth, and he has to find like the missing murder weapon in the space of the dog's life, or he's just dead. So uh, very very exciting stuff. Very exciting stuff. So those were the ones that I think were probably foundational, and then after that, it all becomes a blur because I just read so many things. I do want to make the point though that when I was reading, I wasn't just reading science fiction. Um, so there were other books that were incredibly important for me as I was growing up. Things like Harriet the Spy, as a good example of something else that's not related to science fiction that sticks out in my brain. And for many years, I didn't even think I was going to be a novelist or a science fiction writer at all. I was intending to be a journalist, and that's what I eventually became. And I sort of accidentally became a science fiction writer. So there you have it.
Happy accident.
Yeah.
It's a happy
Yes.
accident. Yeah. And I mean, it's crazy, like the way that the way that life takes its twists and turns. And now, 20 years later, not just 20 years later, it's been more than that since you started writing, since you've been creating stories, since you've been blogging and all that kind of stuff. But 20 years since
Sure.
you've been published, that kind of career longevity is an amazing thing, but also kind of like perplexing in this messed up world of publishing that we exist in. So,
Like, how
can
did
you?
you do it?
Yeah,
Who did, what systems did you sacrifice? Let us know. Well, and I think you make a very good point. I mean, it's no secret that lots of folks get published, but a lot of people are out by the time of their second or third book, and then so having uh, a long career is kind of an anomaly. And there's survivorship bias. You think of the writers that you really like. They're the ones that tend to have stuck around for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years or whatever. Um, but the majority of folks kind of dip their toe in, and then for whatever reason, don't stay in. And so I get asked a lot. They're like, what's the secret? And one of the first things that I tell people, which aggravates them to no end, but is absolutely 100% true, is luck. You Luck is a huge part of it. Um, I remember when Old Man's War came out. It came out on January 1st, 2005, which is an absolutely unfathomable day to have a book out. I mean, just think about, like, your very first book ever going to come out. Oh, I know. Let's put it out on a day where bookstores aren't open, and everybody has spent all their holiday money,
And they're all
uh,
hungover.
and they're all hungover. Nobody's going to go to the bookstore to pick up your book, and yet it went off. But because it was a Tuesday and it was the first Tuesday of the year, books came out on that day. And I remember that I looked at the list of books that were coming out the same day as mine were. And those books were the combination of people who had had careers for a while, some people who were debuting or their second or third book. Um, None of those people wrote with any less competence and facility than I did. But for whatever reason, for whatever quirk happened in 2005, where the world was like Old Man's War, yes, thank you, I'll have that. It just happened for me, and I make that point to a lot of people. It's like you have to be good at what you do. You have to be professional. You have to be competent. You have to be able to tell a good story. But so much of what happens to a career often comes down to luck. Preparation helps because that means that becomes something that you can work with. You're ready for the luck when it happens, but the luck, still has to happen. And so the admission to folks that so much of my career is because of luck. That first initial push, where people were like, "Old Man's War, this is amazing. Let's have some more of this." And I was on my way. Who is to say if it came out a year later or a year earlier that there would have been the same sort of excitement for it? So I always acknowledge that. Like I said, sometimes it drives people crazy. But it can't just be luck. And I'm like, no, actually, no. Sometimes it is. Sometimes
It
you
is the
just get lucky.
frustrating nature of creative endeavors that, yeah, there is a
Mhm.
lot of luck involved. And
Oh
and
yeah,
and now, like we have a much more integrated system with the internet and social media and all this kind of stuff. So the luck can sort of take different forms.
oh
And on
sure.
the publishing side of things, like that's completely changed. Like, how have you seen the publishing industry shift, and what do you kind of think about potential avenues in terms of where it's going in the near future?
Well, the two biggest things that happened. since I started publishing have been, in no particular order, the rise of ebooks, which was huge, but also the rise of audiobooks. And the ebooks were really important because um, they were another way to get books out. We used to be very much at the mercy of whoever was buying for Barnes and Noble or for Borders books. And if they didn't want to take your book, then nobody would be able to find it, right? And then all of a sudden, the online world came up, and Amazon particularly, but other online storefronts as well, would literally sell everything because it was trivial to actually just put the file up and have it ready to go. So the opportunities for that um, became much more significant for people to find your book. Then, of course, the rise of because of the rise of the ebook, also the rise of self-publishing as something that could actually be viable. Again, back in my day of 2005, the way that people self-published is you paid somebody to print off 1,000 copies and you sold them out of your car, right? Or you went to a convention and set up a booth and all of that sort of stuff. So it was very, very intensive, as opposed to doing the thing where you could press a button and all of a sudden it was on a storefront in front of millions of people. That's a huge thing. And then the second thing with the audiobook, which was phenomenal, because again, it went from when I started, the audiobooks were literally a single shelf at your bookstore, and they only had the latest release of literally the biggest authors. You would find a Tom Clancy audiobook. You would find a Stephen King audiobook. You might find a Nora Roberts audiobook, something like that. But everybody else was like, they just didn't even think about audio as something that was significant. Then, because again of the internet and the electronic distribution of things, all of a sudden audio went from this afterthought to an incredibly significant part of a writer's income and reader base. I went from so Old Man's Work came out in 2005. It didn't have an audiobook until, like, I think 2008, right? It just wasn't a priority. Um, and Now, here in 2025, audio is anywhere from 30 to 50% of my business, right?
That's insane.
That's
It
huge.
is
Yeah.
it is absolutely insane. And it's not cutting into print or ebook because they're almost entirely different audiences,
And it's created
right?
an entirely new industry in terms of narrators.
Yeah.
Yes, has absolutely created an industry for narrators who have their own fans. Right, there are people who have listened to books that I've done not because they had any idea who I was, but because they were fans of the narrator. William Dufresne for the Old Man's War series, Tavia Gilbert, who also did some Old Man's War stuff. Obviously, Will Wheaton, who the first time that he narrated one of my audiobooks, he had already had 2 million people following him on Twitter. So, the idea of that being able to tap into those fans, and he and I are now intertwined enough that people tell me that whenever they read my posts on Blue Sky, they're like, "I hear Will narrate them," and I'm like, "That's perfectly fine." But I mean, but it's such
He's gonna start asking for royalties for that.
uh, well, the good news is he is a writer and a New York Times bestselling writer in his own right. So he's got his own royalties, fortunately. But those are just two examples of things that have really changed the ebook revolution, and through that, as a secondary, wave of that, the ability to self-publish, and then the audiobook revolution, which expanded the market. And has now become a significant part of how I sell.
Hmm. And do you see some sort of, because like the way that self-publishing is now, how ebooks and audiobooks and all of it is so integrated, um, what do you see as something that could shift the industry as monumental in as monumental a way as those?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things is that the industry is wrestling right now with. and has both positive and negative things going for it, is the idea of subscription models, right? And you see that particularly with indie folks who are part of Kindle Unlimited or Smashwords or something like that, where it's an all you can eat sort of thing, and you are um, working out of the same pool of money that is provided by Amazon or whomever. And that is really interesting for two reasons. One, um, which is not great in my opinion, is that it is Amazon, in the case particularly of Kindle United or Kindle Unlimited, that defines what the pool of money is. Right? They get to say, this month the pool is such and such. And whereas with traditional publishing or indie that is not in Kindle Unlimited, um, there is no um, there's no penalty for other people doing well in the Kindle Unlimited sort of setup. You are in fact all fighting for the same slice of pie, and that makes things, and that has a very, in my mind, kind of detrimental um, um, effect on the esprit de corps of writers, right? That you're not all in for it together. It is like, push this person out of the way because, they are now competition in the way they weren't before. And I don't know that that's necessarily what everybody does, but that is one of the side effects that can happen because of it. And also, there's the concern that, like Spotify, um, that what will happen is, again, the power curve of the top 1% will get 50% of the income. The next 9% will get the next 20, and then everybody else fights after the scraps. The power law, which, to be fair and to be honest, has always existed in publishing, has always existed in music, has always existed in acting and every creative endeavor. But that power law will become even more exaggerated. And then there's also the issue of course, um, uh, Amazon in particular being a monopoly and a monopsony in terms of distribution. It's not as bad as it looked like it was going to be in the first part of the 21st century, but it is still a significant interest. You have a very few power players who are able to move the market in a significant way. And again, that also means that there are some people who are going to be fortunate and are going to be the 1%, and the people that, you know, get the most benefit, but everybody else is struggling. And so that is a huge aspect of publishing that I think about a lot. I mean, I have books, for example, that are in Kindle Unlimited, but unlike most of the rest of you, um, those are in there on a very specific basis. That means that I actually get royalties for every time it's read that are similar to the royalties that I get on a purchase, and they are meant to be loss leaders for Amazon in order to get people to continue to get the Kindle Unlimited. And obviously, there are a lot, not a lot of, but there are other writers who are with traditional publishers who have basically the same sort of setup, right? So we are not fighting over the same slice of pie
Even though it
as
may be
everybody
perceived that way
else.
because you are on Kindle Unlimited.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's
Right,
just,
right.
those are just special deals between the
Right.
publishers
But
and
yeah, there
Amazon.
are special
Mhm.
deals. But again, that also
Yeah.
points out to the fact that there are now becoming tiers and castes of writers in a way that there weren't necessarily before, and that has implications, and not all of them are great.
We do not need a caste system.
We do not need a caste
Hard
system.
pass.
Not at all.
Every writer should be the equivalent of another writer. Every writer should have the same opportunities. No writer should look at their peer group and be like, how do I push them off a wall so that my stuff remains and theirs doesn't. And those are things that I am concerned about, particularly because in creative fields, and speaking as the former president of SIFWA, the way that we protect ourselves is through solidarity. And if we are looking to cut each other's throats to get a slice of a publisher defined pie, in the case of Kindle Unlimited or any other pot system, it's the same with Spotify or any of those subscription services. Um, then the idea of writer solidarity or creator solidarity is a lot more difficult to achieve, and that doesn't benefit writers. It benefits the people who are inserting themselves as middlemen and owning the distribution. So these are the things that keep me up at night.
They
amongst
also
amongst
sound
like
like the world
all the
building
other
to
reasons.
any dystopian sci-fi novel.
John's next standalone, just
Yeah.
a corporate dystopia.
Well, shifting gears a little bit from the, heat death of the universe, let's talk about you returning to the world of Old Man's War with the upcoming seventh book. How are you feeling about that? What was that experience like, kind of having this full
I mean,
circle moment almost?
I'm feeling pretty good about it. We knew that it was coming for a while. Back in 2015, when I did that 13 book deal um, with Tor, one of the books on that contract was an Old Man's War book. So we knew that there was going to be an Old Man's War book at some point or another. And since this year is the 20th anniversary of Old Man's War, and we were doing a repackaging of the first 6 books of the series into trade paperback, it seemed like a good time to do that. With that said, the reason that it worked out very well is I had enough time, knowing that this was on my contract, to be thinking about a story that I wanted to tell in that universe. If I had not been able to come up with a story I wanted to tell in the universe, then the 20th anniversary wouldn't have mattered, because there's nothing less attractive than an installment of a series that is an open and unapologetic cash grab,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, don't get me wrong. I am grabbing cash. They paid me quite a lot for it.
But you
Um,
put effort
but
into it. It's not,
Yeah.
Yes, but that in and of itself is not sufficient to do it. One of the things that I've been very fortunate about with the Old Man's War series, because the other books that I write sell perfectly well, is that there has been no pressure to go back to the series until and unless it's something where I have a story to tell. And we had that happen with the Human Division and the End of All Things, right? Where the story there was that Tor wanted to. This was back in 2013 or something like that. They wanted to see what serialization and the idea of selling novellas would be like. So they basically were like, "Can you do Old Man's War books?" Where we chop them up and sell them online and see what that looks like. It was literally a research problem, research for them. My payment for those books came out of Macmillan's research and development budget, and they assured me that if it failed miserably, that they would not hold it against me. But that also coincided with me wanting to tell a bunch of stories in the Old Man's War universe in short story form. So I was like, okay, we're going to work together on that. Uh, but that was it was the right time, and it was the right format, and I had stories that I wanted to tell, so it worked out very well. Between the End of All Things and now, it's been 10 years, right? And so very clearly, Tora was not pressuring me to do book number 7 immediately. Um, uh, they were content, and I'm very glad they were, to be like, yeah, whenever you get to that and you want to do it, let us know. And I, a couple of years ago, figured out a story I wanted to tell. Then we had to look at the schedule to see where it would fit in. And then we were like, oh, did you know that 2025 is the 20th anniversary? Why don't we put it there? And
on
so
January
that's,
1st. No.
yeah, believe me, there was some thought about that. But the that's one of the nice things about having that long contract I have with Tor, is that we can do that planning well in advance. So that's one of the reasons, for example, why Moon is coming out uh, the before the Shattering Peace, which is the seventh Old Man's War book, because we knew that we were going back into space for Old Man's War, and it would be space opera, and it would be the Colonial Union. we didn't want to put another book out first that was going to go out into space. And then we saw that Kaiju and Starter Villain, which were contemporary science fiction with high concept, did very well. So so we were like, so we do another contemporary science fiction high concept thing again to kind of complete a very informal trilogy of these kinds of books, and then we go into space. So that sort of being able to do that long-term planning has been a real blessing in terms of both um, kind of pacing things and making sure that people don't get burned out from one type of book that I do, and then also making sure that I don't fry my own brain.
Yeah.
And you
And
don't
I mean,
usually hear the upside to the publishing industry is like very long lead times to
right.
things, but it sounds like it's kind of a blessing in your
No,
case.
this planning sounded
Yeah.
perfect. Like very
Yeah, well, and it is. I mean, this is one of the reasons why. I mean, 2000 in 2015 when I came into Tor, and I had just finished I had just finished the End of All Things. I was out of contract, and the thing that I just absolutely hate is doing contractual arguments, right? And so we were like, we're going to come in, we're going to have like 13 different ideas and they will pick five, right? And that will be great because then I don't have to think about it for 5 years. And so we came in and I gave them the sheet of here are these five, here are these 13 things. And I said, so pick how many you want. And they said, okay, we'll take them all. And I was like, but, um, but they were thinking the same thing I was thinking. It's like I had done well for them. They liked working with me. A I'm not a problematic author on the production side because I generally hit my deadlines and I'm generally responsive to the things that the publisher needs me to do. And they didn't want anybody else to have any of my backlist. So they were like, okay, we're going to take this. And now we have this long way of looking at things where we can be like, we'll put these books here and then we'll put these books here. And when this book comes out, these are the books in the backlist that we will surface again to promote that because they will work for whatever book that is. And then when you do another book, then we can do these other books to sort of highlight the backlist as well. And that sort of strategic planning um, is when it works and when you have everybody committed to like this is the thing we want to do, it's unbeatable. And in my particular case, it works because I am someone who backlists like unbelievably. Like my books when they come out, they do fine, right? They will show up on the New York Times bestseller list for a week, just a week. Um, but but then they will just like live forever in backlist. Old Man's War has sold exactly the same number of books for every year for 20 years. It's just
that's
Damn.
insane.
ridiculous.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
and so if you have that, then obviously you want. I mean, I think in Tor's case, they absolutely wanted to be able to control the backlist, and for me, I wanted them to do that because it made it easier to, you know. Moon's going to come out. We are going to spotlight Kaiju and Starter Villain, but we're also going to spotlight Red Shirts and Agents of the Stars because it is very similar sort of thing. Obviously, when Shattering Peace comes out, we're spotlighting the Old Man's War series, but we can also spotlight the Interdependency series. All of these sorts of opportunities are great. I'm going to stop talking now.
No, dude, that's actually like you're like that is such a cool position to be in because yeah,
Yeah.
like it does give you the flexibility to say I'm gonna let the my relationship with say the Old Man's War universe, I'm gonna let that simmer, and when the right idea comes, it
Yeah,
comes, and then I'm going to be able to tackle that with my full passion and creative skill, as opposed
right.
to like you're contractually obligated to put out another sequel like in the next 2 years. It's like fuck, now I gotta like force myself in order to
Yeah,
figure out what that
yes,
thing
Like
is,
wringing blood
right?
from a stone. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. Well, and that is the thing that there are two aspects of that that I think are really interesting. The first thing is way back when Patrick Nielsen Hayden, who is my editor and blessedly does not have a filter, told me, he said, I think it was like 2008 or something. It's like, he's like, yeah, you could write every other book as an Old Man's War book and we would be happy, and we literally wouldn't care whatever else you wrote because we knew another Old Man's War was coming out. And I remember him saying that, and part of me was like, "Oh, so now I know how to do this in case I want to do it." But also, it absolutely terrified me because it is a explicit tie into a universe that what happens if you get burned out? What if you don't actually have a new story that you want to tell in it? All of that sort of stuff. And so it could become handcuffs. The other thing is that very recently I was at the World Con in Glasgow, and I was talking to another author, and we were talking about projects, and they made the point that they have a very successful series, and they said, but the difference between you and me is that you have John Scalzi fans, and I have fans of my series, right? Um, and this series was a big series, and it's not a problem. They are doing quite well with it, but it is a thing that the things that we worry about is like, do my readers love me for me, or do my readers love me for this one particular series that I am now going to obliged to continue whether I want to or not. And so I've been very fortunate that in the scope of my career, uh, there are people who love the Old Man's War series, and they are very excited that the seventh one is coming out. But there are also people who are not Old Man's War fans, but they were fans of Red Shirts, or they're fans of Kaiju or Starter Villain, and they're happy that there is something else there for them as well. And there are people who like the Lock-In
I was
series,
just
and
about to say Lock-In is one of my favorite series of yours.
right, and in those cases, I have the Dispatcher series that is very much the same sort of thing. So for me, it really is true that my career has developed so that I have all those differing kind of shots on goal, and that has made a difference in the longevity of my career. That I don't have to be a slave to a series. Uh, and again, some people have series and they love their series and they're more than happy to be in the series. I'm glad for them that works out for them. I'm also glad in my own case I get to do other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I only have my debut novel out, but I've already started sort of looking ahead at my career and looking at authors like
Mhm.
you and other friends of mine who, especially in indie, I think there's a lot more flexibility in terms of like you don't have to depend on a publisher in order to sort of like choose the ways in which you navigate your
Sure.
publishing trajectory. And so
Yeah.
for me, I'm kind of like, okay, here I have my shared universe, the Fungal verse, and there are different
Mhm.
series within that. But then I also have series outside of that because I do feel that for me personally as a creative person that handcuffing would really bog me down and would really make things a
Sure.
lot more difficult.
Well, it's the same thing as when you're making investments in the financial world. Um, it's really smart to have a diversified portfolio. You don't want everything, shove everything on one stock, and then you're limited to it. On the other hand, to be clear, there are some folks who really are just like, I love my series. I want to keep expanding my series. And as long as the series sells and they are in love with the universe that they've created, then they should absolutely continue to do that. There's no right way. Right. There's just the way that works for you. I know for me that I love the Old Man's War universe. I love the interdependency universe. I really enjoyed doing Lock-In and Head On, and I would be happy to do more of those. So I love all the things that I get to do. I also like the fact that every once in a while I can just be like, and I'm going to do some really random thing, like turn the
Mhm.
moon to cheese, because I
The perfect segue.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
we
And I
do want to
mean,
start talking about
yeah, let's
your
talk about
latest book.
cheese.
Yeah.
let's talk about cheese.
So, I
By
mean,
the way, I want to let you all know that one of my cats is trying to pick a fight with another cat over here. So if all of a sudden you hear like cat
We got a
yelling,
cat
it's
fight
yeah,
we're
live.
used to cat
there's a
shenanigans.
literal cat fight going on, so don't be alarmed, folks. I will make sure the cats are separated before any damage gets done, but I'm just letting you know it might happen. I'm keeping an eye on events as they progress.
The anticipation is killing
Thoughts
me.
and prayers.
Right, exactly.
Can you start off by giving us like a pitch for your latest book, When the Moon Hits Your Eye, because it's so much fun to talk about, but we gotta start with the elevator pitch. So for anyone who might
Right.
not be familiar with the concept.
The way that I just have been describing it to people, because they would come up to me and they would be like, "So what's the next book?" And I'm like, "For the entire length of a lunar cycle, the moon turns to cheese, and everybody has to deal with it." And of course, and that's the pitch. And everybody kind of looks at me, and there's two things: either they look at me like, "Who are you, and why do you have a career?" That's the first response. And then the second response is, "Yeah, that's 100% you." Okay,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm the guy who just did a book about kaiju and James Bond supervillains, and I did the book about red shirts. So I have become the guy who people are like, yes, you can take this ridiculous high concept and actually play with it. Why not? So when I told Patrick, I was like, I'm going to turn the moon to cheese. He was like, okay.
So where did the idea come from, though? I mean, were you just
Yeah, because man,
watching Lady and the
I
Tramp
was
one day, or?
Brett, I was actually like, I was thinking about like how far back does this cultural joke go? And
Yeah.
it like legit goes back centuries, like
Right. And
it's
this
like
is,
to like
and
the
this is,
1600s, 1500s. It's crazy.
yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing that really fascinates me because so it's actually very similar to the what I was thinking about when I was thinking about red shirts. When I was thinking about red shirts, I was flatly stunned that no one had really written a book um, about the red shirts. There have been books about expendable characters, right? But they were very explicitly in a universe where, they were like Suicide Squad sort of people, or Magnificent Seven sort of thing. But the concept of red shirts, the Scotty, Kirk, and Spock and Ensign Jones come down. Somebody's going to die. Who is it going to be? Um, and nobody had ever done it in for novel length. And part of the reason that they didn't do it at novel length is because everybody got the joke. It's like, oh no, Ensign Jones is a R.I.P. And it was a 5 minute joke. And one of the things I thought about that was, yes, it's a 5 minute joke, but it's also about the existential terror of not having free will. It's 100% that. Why hasn't anybody done this? This is literally the lowest of low hanging fruit in the science fiction world, and nobody has essayed this at all. I'm going to take this low hanging fruit and I'm going to make a pie with it. I am not. I am. I am not. So I am shameless enough. Excuse me. I am shameless enough to just be like, "Pff, this is a great low hanging fruit. I will take it." Um, Fast forward of 13 years, and I'm thinking about moon and the moon turning to cheese. Right? Everybody knows it's there. There are hundreds of picture books about it, right? Your toddler knows
Oh,
about the
yes.
moon turning to cheese. Uh,
This is true.
and so that but nobody has done anything with the moon turning to cheese in a sort of grown up format. And so for me, just like the concept of red shirts is a 5 minute joke, but is also again about the existential terror of not being in charge of your life. The moon turning to cheese is a children's picture book, but it is also a metaphor for the fact that so much of the things that affect our lives on a day-to-day basis are absolutely out of our control, that we had no say in um, you know precipitating them, but we still have to deal with them. you know the moon turning to cheese is not something that just is going to affect one or two people. It literally, you look up into the sky, here's the moon turned to cheese. Whether you think it's ridiculous or what or not, everybody on the planet has to deal with the fact that it has happened. And goodness knows, especially now, we all are very aware that things are happening that we don't have any control over, but are directly affecting our lives day in and day out, and that we have to either fight against or decide to ride the wave, or whatever it is that we're going to do. we can't ignore it. You have to deal with it. And so having that the moon turn to cheese is ridiculous, right? Absolutely is 100%
But it's a
ridiculous,
perfect existential allegory.
but it is a perfect existential allegory. And the nice thing about it is that, if you want it, all that allegorical stuff is there, and if you don't, then it's just a great ride for 29 days, where each day is a chapter. Each day of the lunar cycle is a chapter, and we get to see how everybody on various walks of life, from president to kids in a lunchroom, deal with the fact that the moon has turned to cheese. So it can work on multiple levels like that. But this is my point, right? That even the most ridiculous things, um, if you make the characters in your book take it seriously, because it is their lives, there's a lot that you can do with it, and a lot you can work with it.
Yeah. Well, how did you decide that you were going to use like the lunar cycle? Because you said that was sort of like your initial pitch for it was one
Yeah,
lunar cycle, moon turns to cheese, world goes to shit. Everyone's
yeah.
got to figure it out. How did you decide on like that structure for the book, and um sort of how the characters themselves fit into that lunar cycle
Sure.
structure?
Sure. Well, the really nice thing about this is that when you go with, I'm going to turn the moon into cheese, right? Um, all of a sudden, the orbital dynamics of the moon really lend themselves to a story structure, right? Because you have that orbit, and that orbit around the Earth is 29 days and change, right? 29
It's
and a
like a
quarter days.
circular storytelling in
Yep.
Right,
nature.
exactly. And so, and that is the thing that was really good, because inherently there was a structure there, which is great, because I am the most structureless human being you've ever met. I am just literally a blob. So, the fact that it's like, oh, there are 29 days, 29 chapters, and because this is something that affects everybody on the planet, um, I will do every one of them is a day, and we'll have a different main character, because you can get all walks of life. Now, it affects everybody in the world, but I am an American, and so I focused on the United States, simply because if I tried to say how somebody in Burkina Faso was dealing with it, it would be absolutely be inauthentic. Like, I wouldn't know how to portray that person, but I do know how to portray someone in Iowa. So I went ahead and had it happen in the United States. But again, the idea of all walks of life, all different types of people, um, and in a sort of, if you're talking about it in cinematic metaphors, it's much more like a Robert Altman film, where you would have overlapping narratives and conversations and everything else, than like a straight ahead narrative that you might get with like a superhero film or something like that. And that was fun for me, because most of my books are straight ahead narratives. They have a protagonist, they have an antagonist usually. There might be a couple of point of view characters, but not 29, or however many it was that I ended up having. I think I had slightly less than
There
29,
were some that had
but
Yeah,
a
there's
couple of
some
chapters.
repeats.
Mhm.
yeah, there were a couple that were recurring, because they had to be. And But otherwise, but those multiple characters was kind of an opportunity. But it's also a kickback to an older form of science fiction narrative, which was the fix up novel. And a perfect example of a fix up novel would be like The Martian Chronicles, where Ray Bradbury had published all these short stories ostensibly about Mars, but they were unrelated, right? And then he collected them all together, and he wrote some stuff that put a narrative thread through all of them, and voila, you've got a novel. So um, science fiction and fantasy has been doing this for literal decades, but it's not something that happens as much anymore. Possibly because the short fiction market is not as much of an engine for novel writing, as it used to be. Um, so in many ways, I was thinking of it as a fix up novel, without anything to fix up, right? But still, all those little short stories connected by the narrative thread of the moon itself.
Yeah, that frame story.
So you mentioned that, by and large, each chapter is from a different point of view character, but you do end up coming back to the occasional character here and there when the story requires. Did you end up
Sure.
having any favorite characters that you were writing, or, alternatively, anyone that you just really needed to murder with apocalyptic cheese?
Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but no, I mean there are.
But we all know who you're talking about.
Yeah, no, there. I mean, let's just say that in the universes I create, karma is a thing. So there are some people who uh, get the ends they deserve, but the funny thing is that some of the characters and some of the chapters that I read, some of the characters that I've sort of uh, personally emotionally engaged in kind of surprised me. There is a um, two recurring characters who are students at the University of Wisconsin.
Yes, I
Um,
love this storyline.
Go
yeah,
Badgers!
yeah, and they were quite unexpectedly, them having their little love story in there. I thought it actually worked out very, very well. So I was very happy about that. There's also a chapter that is literally a Slack channel where a group of friends who have been trying to coordinate a party, and the party is collapsing, and they're yelling at each other, and we find out that there was a reason that the person who was planning the party wanted all of those people in one place at one time, and that sort of dynamic between those characters I thought was like I got really wrapped up in their story as I was writing it. I was like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen next. And so it was kind of fun for me. What's been really interesting for me is for the people who have read it ahead of time, um, is because you do have all those characters. There are obviously some characters who are going to affect individual readers more than others. But which characters those are is absolutely all over the board, right?
Right.
It's like a
And
personality test you could put out.
right, it is absolutely a personality test, right? There's a chapter that has a woman who has wanted to be a fantasy writer her entire life, and I've had people be like, "That's a little on the nose, isn't it?" And then there are other people like, "That character is me,"
Yeah,
and I'm like,
Greta and I were talking about that.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that particular character. And so it's been fun to watch what parts of the story people have responded to, because there are always going to be favorites, and some of the characters you're going to be like, okay, other ones you're going to be like, these, I need these people in my life. I want more stories about them. I think that there will be. That this particular book may generate a lot of fan fiction because people will want more than just one chapter's worth of material from them. So I think that that's kind of exciting. I There is one character that I sort of really am kind of emotionally involved with, who is the ex-wife of a famous person, um, and their relationship to that person, and thinking about their relationship at the end of days, that works on several levels there, and that is a story that for me I attached a lot of emotion to, so I'm always curious to find out how people respond to it. One of my favorite reviews of the book it actually came from Mary Robinette Cole, who is a wonderful writer. I'm sure you know who she is. And she had an advanced copy of it. And she wrote on Goodreads, she's like, um, this should not work as well as it does. I'm in the airport and I'm laughing, but I am also crying. Fuck you, John Scalzi. How dare you? Right. And I'm just, like, yes, because I
You're
know
like,
what I
"Mwah."
know where she's
Yeah,
crying. Um,
chef's kiss of a
that's the whole
review.
thing. Yeah, but that's the whole thing. I mean, I do think that there, it runs the whole gamut because you have the whole gamut of characters, and the whole gamut of circumstances. I do think that people, when they initially start reading the book, again, like they did with Red Shirts, or be like, okay, this is a farce because the moon has turned to cheese, or these characters are doomed characters or whatever. But it's not all about farce, right? There, I do intentionally play with the full range of human emotions because I think that's what would actually happen.
Yeah, and at the same time, you also get into the science of like what is the actual um, you know response of this orbiting body when it changes its fundamental materials. It's like when this thing turns to cheese. The joke is there, but it's sort of um nobody ever goes deeper than it's like it's made of cheese, but it's like, yeah, but what the fuck does it mean it's made of cheese? How does gravity affect that? Like
Right.
the density of it, all these different things. What were some of
Yes.
the things that you went into in terms of like the research? And I'm sure you came across some very strange stuff along the way.
I mean, the thing is, there are two things going on. One, I did actually a fair amount of research into um, cheese, and also, about if in fact the moon turned to cheese, what would it look like, and all of that sort of stuff. But the other thing that I learned to do, and I well before this particular book, but it worked specifically for this book, um, is the best way to do concepts like this is to not over explain it, because the instant you over explain it, um, the people who actually know this shit will absolutely come down on you, right? Um, I mean, and
It'll be
I
like a
am
different. It'll be like a different "fuck you, John Scalzi" than Mary Robinette's.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, like I am very well aware of my limitations as someone who knows math and science. Literally, the quadratic equation was sort of the outer realm of my understanding of math. And then I had another 3 years of math in high school after that, but I couldn't tell you what it was. My brain has completely blocked it out. But I'm aware that anytime that I try to, like, science things, I run the risk of just completely screwing it up. And so I didn't over explain. One of the questions when I tell people, when I would explain the book, it's like, yes, the moon turns to cheese. The very first question that anybody ever asks when they're like, yeah, the moon turns to cheese is, well, what kind of cheese? Right. And you're like, on one hand, does it matter what kind of cheese? But on the other hand, people are really invested in knowing what kind of
Yeah,
cheese it was, and it's a running joke, in a book. It's not a spoiler that people keep asking what kind of cheese it is, and it never gets answered.
yeah.
And
Or
one
like,
of the
would you,
reasons that
or
I
like speculating, like, would you eat it? You know?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And the government
But
refusing to call it cheese for
Yeah.
like the
right, it's
entire book.
organic matrix. My God. But one of the things is that I knew that if I specified the cheese, like what kind of cheese it might have been, that some nerd would come and be like, so you said it was Parmesan, and I actually checked what the specific density of Parmesan is, and the diameter of the moon as you gave it was all wrong, and also it wouldn't collapse the way that you said it was going to collapse, and it's just
And then it's
completely
like
wrong.
John sails in France tank and his sails in Italy
Right,
soar.
exactly. So all of this sort of stuff.
Parmesan would never do this to me.
Right, exactly. So the best thing to do is not to explain it, and I guarantee you 100% that when I go on tour for this in late March and early April, some nerd is going to show up and they're going to be like, "So I did the math. The only cheese this could possibly be is," and then they'll explain it. And I'm like, "Good job." Because what else can you say?
Bravo.
Like I said,
Bravo.
I'm
Did you
not
bring
going to
enough cheese
explain
for
it.
the class?
Right,
Cheese and crackers
exactly.
for everybody.
Well, and I also know that when I go on tour, the people are going to, like, give me cheese.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
so
Yeah, like I
Yeah.
saw I saw Chuck Wendig when he went on tour for Black River Orchard. People were gifting him apples. I'm like, that's
yep,
beautiful, man.
Yes, it is. But and the really funny thing is just so like when red shirts, I would get cookies that were like red shirt cookies or something like that. Or because all my social media bios are I enjoy pie, people will bring pies to the events and stuff like that and give them to me. And my friends who are not writers are incredulous. They're like, "You're not eating those things, are you?" I was like, "You have to understand, they don't want me dead because
Yeah.
if I die, then they don't get any more books. So they're not going to poison the cookies. They're not going to poison the pie, at least not intentionally, or any of that sort of stuff. So I'm not worried about eating the baked goods that show up
Yeah.
on at my
And
events.
nerds
So
are
as long
generally
as
good people.
yes, nerds are generally good people. So as long as the cheese is securely wrapped, I'm not going to be sitting there going like, this cheese is going to kill me. So
They're just gonna show up with like an already like prepared charcuterie board with
right,
all the
exactly.
cheeses there for you.
Here you go.
Enjoy, John.
Yes.
Oh my god. All right,
Well,
well,
I hope your
John,
tour takes you to Wisconsin. There is literally a Mars cheese castle, like within spitting distance of
Greta
where I
Greta will
live.
bring you some cheese.
I
So
mean, the really funny thing is, so with there's a chapter, two chapters actually that take place in Wisconsin, and they involve cheese shops in Capitol Square, and one of the cheese shops actually exists, and the other one does not exist, but exists in a space that actually does exist on Capitol Square. Um, Obviously given different names than
Yeah.
the things that are there. But absolutely, the last time I was in Wisconsin, I think for the book festival, um, I actually scoped out the entire square. I'm like, where is the cheese shop? I know there's
Hmm.
one here.
where
Here it
can I put their
is.
competition?
Yes, and where can I put the competition? And it is. It's like directly across. So there you have
Amazing.
Love it.
Beautiful. Well, Greta, get ready. Get the
All
cheese
right.
ready. You got this.
Oh, it's always ready.
It's always ready. All right, well, John, this has been wonderful. But to close out, we have a two-parter for you. If you can give listeners and viewers a good bit of soundbite writing advice and be a weird or random fact that you find to be utterly fascinating.
Okay. Well, the writing advice is actually one that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is give yourself permission to suck, particularly if you're a newer writer. Um, and I give the example of, so I make music now, right? My COVID project was building a music studio in my basement, and eventually I bought enough stuff where I'm like, okay, the hobby no longer can be buying stuff. You now actually have to start making music with it. And so I started making music with it, and I knew that as I was starting to do it, that what I was doing was not going to be good, right? Because I was new to it and I was, learning all the things about how the instruments work, how production works, how all this sort of stuff goes. But I gave myself permission to suck because um, nobody has ever picked up a guitar and immediately did a brilliant guitar solo, right? Everybody started off from the position of not being good, and then you work through not being good until you finally become good out of practice and learning what you like and what you don't like. Um, it's easier to think about it with guitars than it is with writing because we all know how to write and we can do emails and we can communicate to each other with writing. But the simple fact of the matter is when you start doing narrative and when you start doing other things with the writing other than just simple communication, um, it's difficult and you're not going to be great at it. But knowing that you are not going to be great at it does two things. You can just be like, okay, I'm going to suck, but I'm going to try this anyway. And the other thing is it gives you the freedom to try all different sorts of things because you suck equally at all of them, you know? And so give yourself permission to suck. And once you do that, you will find the things that work really well for you. And with enough time, you actually become good with that. And then weird fact. Um, is it just any random fact or is it a weird
Anything,
fact about me?
anything that interests you. Yeah.
Um, I'll do a weird fact about me, which is see this tooth? It actually came in twice. I
What?
like I had I had a baby tooth, and then I was an adult tooth, and then there was another adult tooth underneath it, right?
What?
Which
Crazy.
was really disconcerting the first time that the adult tooth became wobbly, because I'm
Yeah.
like, what is going on? And so I
This
went
shouldn't
to
be
the dentist,
happening.
and I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, what is going on? And they like they did the x-ray, and they're like, there's another tooth underneath there. And I'm like, this is an adult tooth. And they're like, okay. And there's another tooth underneath it. So yeah, so it's this one. Although it might be this one, I can't remember. But I had a tooth come in 3 times. So baby tooth, adult tooth, adult tooth. So
Amazing.
Well, I hope the
that
tooth fairy
was
gave
that
you extra.
that was really disturbing. Well, now, and of course, I was like, are there any more that are packed up in there that I need to know
Like a
about? And
shark,
they
man. You have like new layers of teeth coming in.
right, exactly. They just keep coming in. It's like, and have I been doing dental hygiene for no good reason? Because it's like, oh, it's fine.
It's
Another
like,
one
oh,
comes in.
fuck this. It'll have a
But
cavity. It'll just disappear.
I have been assured that, in fact, no, all my teeth are the ones that I have. So if I want to keep them, I have to floss now. So fine, I will floss. Fine.
Practice good dental hygiene, people. So
Yes,
Greta and I,
absolutely.
we were teaching toddlers how to brush their teeth.
Right. Don't
Don't
ruin our
ever.
credibility, please.
Amazing. Well, John, thank you so much for chatting with Greta and I today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And if you could please let everyone know where they can find you online.
Literally type Scalzi into any search engine and it will take you directly to me. Or go to scalzi.com, and that's my website, which has been there since 1998. And then on Blue Sky, which is where I hang out most on social media these days, scalzi.com.
Amazing. And you got 20 years of books that you can enjoy,
Yes,
John.
exactly.
So,
You will not be
latest
bored.
one, you will not be bored. Latest one is When the Moon Hits Your Eye. If you want to get into that cheesy moon business, and then the Old Man's War Book 7 is out in September, The Shattered Piece.
Yes.
So, you got lots to look forward to this year. You can also follow SFF Addicts all over the place at SFF Addicts Pod. You can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can also pick up Mushroom Blues in all available formats if you want a little bit of mushroom mystery in your life. Greta, what about you?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram and TikTok these days, but you can also find me on Twitter at Greta K. Kelly. And of course, you can go check out Queen of Days if you're interested in a book about thieves with more swagger than sense, and an audiobook that recently won an award. So go check it out.
Nice. Audiobooks. That's where it's at,
They're
baby.
awesome.
All right. Well, stay tuned next week for part 2 with John, where we're going to be doing a master class on bringing the funny to sci-fi. For now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.